Hello, everyone. Chris Green, the history chap, and it's Friday afternoon, so it's got to be a bit of history chat, a bit of looking back at the events in British history this week. So, welcome to you all. I can see actually we're getting a fair few folk coming in today. So, before I go into all the details, I'll let a few more people sign on. I'll also say hello to all of you. Hello, Leslie, over in South Carolina. Great to see you again. Mike, the disabled Welshman, great to see you. I saw Jen was there somewhere. Hello, Jen. Charlie Manson, lovely to see you as well, Charlie. Sarah Jane, hello. And Sandy Sinclair, good afternoon to you too, Sandy. So I know, well, obviously Leslie's already put that he's in South Carolina. So if you tell me where you're from in the world, that's always good. I'm one of those sad people. I love to know where people come from and where people are coming in from, because we seem to have a big worldwide community with the history chap, which is great, and loving every minute of it. Let's see who else is saying hello. I've just seen I've now fired a starting gun, haven't I? Murray, hello. As you've retired, you can now finally watch the live show. Oh, well, congratulations, Murray, and all the very best with your retirement as well. Hope you're enjoying it already. Kat, you're from North Carolina. I guess NC is from USA. Yep. Michael Belaine, hello to you too. Sandy's mentioned something that's coming up, so I won't steal your thunder now, Sandy, but brace yourself, mate. Brace yourself. Soggy Cumbria from Jen. Always Soggy Cumbria. That's why you got lakes in Cumbria, isn't it? So there we go. Sarah Jane says, far too near to Bletchley Park to say where she is. So, okay. Welcome. And it's been a busy week, actually. In fact, I'm off on holiday. So here's a heads up. There won't be a live show next Friday because I'm off to the south of France, off to Antibes, down on the south coast, on the Côte d'Azur. So that's going to be great. Looking forward to that. And Jen, I don't want to rub it in, but the temperature down there is 24 degrees at the moment, and there's just big bright suns the whole day on the weather forecast. So looking forward to that. And I'm off on Sunday, flying from Heathrow. A little bit of a trek, but yeah, hey. So been a busy week because obviously I'm doing this live call. I did a live call for my patrons and members of my supporters club earlier this week. Jen, you were on that. And I've managed to get 2 videos up. One went out last night about Exercise Tiger, the US dress rehearsal for D-Day that went disastrously wrong off the south coast of Britain, off the coast of Devon and Dorset. So that went out last night. Don't know if people have had a chance to watch that one yet. And I've already got next week's video in the bag as well. So it's been a bonkers week, along with suddenly realizing I didn't have any euros and that all my short sleeve shirts look rather shabby. So, and Sarah was not impressed at all when she went through my wardrobe. So that's been another job I've had to do. So there you go. So, busy week for me. Hope you've enjoyed. As I said, be interested to know what you thought of the video that went out last night about Exercise Tiger. Originally covered up, of course, during the Second World War, and you can understand why, because you're hardly going to go and tell all your troops that it's going to be a disaster on D-Day because we can't even get it right on the beaches of Devon. So yes, I can understand why it was covered up. Some people say that the actual live fire exercise on Slapstone Sands is still covered up to this day. Conspiracies. The problem with them, or the beauty of them, is you can never quite prove they don't exist, do you? So there we go. And lots more folk joining in here. Murray has just put in Northamptonshire, county of the pothole. I think Cheshire might have a go. I can. Even Sarah is now convinced that immediately you go across the border from Shropshire into Cheshire, you don't need to see the county sign. You just know where you're in the county of potholes. But anyway, we're off there. Jeremy Scott says 700 soldiers and sailors dead on the eve of D-Day. Yeah, I think the official figure, Jeremy, is 749. And as I say, there is still controversy as to whether there were live fire deaths at Slapstone Sands and whether those have ever been acknowledged. Well, I guess there will have been. They would have just probably wrapped them into the casualty figures from D-Day or the Normandy campaign. Because obviously, you can't say his son's disappeared. We don't know where he's gone. But much easier to say he was killed in action in Normandy or something, I guess. But anyway, that's by the by. So look, it's been a busy week for me. It's been a busy week in history as well. So let me just tell you what happened this week, and then I'll dive into some of them in a little moment. So this gives you the overview, all right? So we're running from Sunday, the 19th of May. So 19th of May, 1536, Anne Boleyn, Queen Anne Boleyn, is executed. Henry VIII's second wife, and of course, mother of Queen Elizabeth I. So executed 19th of May, 1536. 19th of May, 1759, Kew Gardens is opened in London. So yeah, that's a bit more pleasant than someone being beheaded, isn't it? 19th of May, 1898, William Gladstone, one of the great venerable prime ministers, the grand old man of liberal politics in 19th century Britain, 4 times prime minister, died. 20th of May, Sandy, here's your moment. 20th of May, 685. We're talking over 1400 years ago. 20th of May, 685, the Battle of Dunnecton, or as some English historians call it, Nectonsmere, which was the Picts versus the English. Actually, it wasn't quite that. It was the Picts versus the Northumbrians, who were an English or Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And this was fought up in the Highlands of Scotland. A little bit of controversy as to exactly where the battle was ever fought, but a crushing victory for the Picts over the Northumbrians, and fundamentally broke Northumbrian military power, forever. And the power in Anglo-Saxon England shifted south. Up until then, Northumbria had been the main Anglo-Saxon power block, and King Bredai of the Picts defeated the army of Northumbria, killed their king in battle, killed most of their troops, or enslaved what was left of them. As I say, Northumbria's power as a military power broken, and power in Anglo-Saxon England went south to first Mercia and then Wessex. And I'll talk about that in a little while, maybe. The 20th of May, slightly closer up, 20th of May still, 1756, the Battle of Minorca in the 7 Years' War. That's Minorca, those of you who go on holiday to Spain or the Balearic Islands. Yes, this is the Minorca that we're talking about. It was at the time, the British had occupied it. So effectively, I suppose you could call it a part of the British Empire. I don't think it was ever sort of actually spoken of as that. But the British had possession of Minorca at the time. There was a big naval battle, which was actually a bit of a stalemate. And I might come back to that in a moment as well. Let's stay on the 20th of May. 20th of May, 1845, the last duel ever fought in Britain took place on this day at Gosport, or on a beach near Gosport in Hampshire. I'll definitely be coming back to that one for you, okay? Let's just quickly see if we're getting any other comments, because we've now got as far as effectively Monday this week. So HMS Hood was sunk. Thank you, John, for sharing that one. John McMillan says you love history. Alex Sexton, thank you very much about kind words about great video on Operation Tiger or Exercise Tiger. It's referred to as both. The Bismarck was sunk. Leslie Devo, love Spain, my second favourite to the British Isles. Yeah, well, you get better weather there, that's for sure, don't you? Although it gets boring after a while if it's always sunny. Still celebrated by the Spanish, says David. And yes, David, you're actually coming in from Spain, so love to see you. Yes, it's funny how the Spanish don't seem to like people like Francis Drake, and they don't like to be reminded that they lost Gibraltar, but they are very keen to remember all the victories they did have over the British. It's funny, isn't it, history, and how it influences our national stories, our national narratives. Thank you, Charlie, for your comments on Exercise Tiger as well. I'm coming to that one in a moment. Guy from SETI Alpha, thank you very much indeed. And David saying Granada still has snow on the mountains down there in south of Spain. Isn't that amazing? Eh? People probably leaving Britain to go to Spain for holidays for a bit of sun. Right, so let's crack on with the rest of this week then. Let's move to the 21st of May. 21st of May, 1420, the Treaty of Troyes, which was basically signed by the King of France and the King of England at the time, Henry V. And it basically was an agreement that this was following Agincourt, 5 years after the English victory at Agincourt. And this was an agreement that Henry would marry the King of France's daughter. And when the King of France died, Henry and his or their children would inherit the French throne. And I'll come back to that one in a minute because that's quite important. Okay. 21st of May, 1982, British forces land at San Carlos Bay in the Falkland Islands. So, yeah, that touches on the fact that we were heading towards the Battle of Goose Green in this week in British history as well. 1982, during the Falklands conflict between Britain and Argentina. 22nd of May, 1455, the Wars of the Roses begin with the Battle of St. Albans, or the First Battle of St. Albans. And I did a series about the Wars of the Roses a couple of years ago, and actually it would be lovely to revisit it, because it's one of those battles, it's one of those periods in British history, English history, that people have all heard about. And they don't know much more than that. It's sort of like, yeah, there was lots of wars. Lancashire and Yorkshire seem to be involved. Red roses, white roses, and somehow Henry Tudor ends up winning it all, and Richard III is left dead at the Battle of Bosworth and buried under a car park for many years in Leicester. And actually, it's a fascinating period of English history, as I say, bloody, changing fortunes, shifting alliances. Ultimately a watershed, end of the Plantagenets, but that was never how it was supposed to have turned out. But this massive family dispute that lasted 30 years. And some of the great battles on English soil were fought during the Wars of the Roses. You know, Battle of Tewkesbury, the Battle of Towton, of course, up in Yorkshire, supposed to be the biggest and bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. We have the Battle of Mortimer's Cross down in Hereford on the Herefordshire-Shropshire border. And of course, it also all kicked off at the Battle of St. Albans on the 22nd of May, 1455, where Richard of York faces off King Henry VI, leader of the House of Lancaster. Slightly more up to date and also probably sadder, 22nd of May, 1915, the Quintin's Hill railway disaster. I will speak about this in a moment because it's got a bit of military history as well. But the Quintin's Hill railway disaster, 226 people killed in this disaster just over the border in Scotland, close to Gretna Green. And it's the worst ever railway disaster in British history. Occurred during the First World War. So I will come back to that one in a moment. 23rd of May, 1701, Captain Kidd is hanged at Execution Dock in London on the River Thames. And I'll probably talk about Captain Kidd because, hey, we all like a pirate, don't we? And after the success of my Dick Turpin video, I get the feeling that secretly everyone quite likes these villains out there. So maybe we've got to spend a little bit of time looking at some of the other highwaymen in British history, but also some of the pirates as well. 23rd of May, 1798, the United Irishmen Rebellion starts in Ireland, a rebellion against British rule, and I'll mention them in a little bit more detail as well, hopefully in a moment. Okay, but this is Wolfe Tone. This is the Great Rebellion, and it's really interesting. The Society of United Irishmen wanted to free Ireland from British rule, also wanted to make it more democratic, and they were really the United Irishmen were really galvanized and influenced by the French Revolution and also the American Revolution. And they were really sort of modeling themselves on that. And what's very interesting in relation to Irish history is that initially, at any rate, they set out as a non-sectarian organization. This wasn't Catholics versus Protestants. It wasn't Catholics versus, striving for independence and Protestants not wanting it. They were actually united. Wolfe Tone himself was a Protestant. Very strong in Belfast, with a Presbyterian backing, and very strong down in Dublin as well, where there was a mixed Presbyterian and Catholic backing. Ultimately, it did become sectarian, like all things in Ireland, unfortunately, in its history. So, but anyway, it broke out, or the revolt started on the 23rd of May, 1798. and it's a critical date in Irish history, in Irish nationalist history. 24th of May, 1337, back into the Middle Ages. I tell you, we're going all over the show so far today. But 24th of May, 1337, the 100 Years' War breaks out, or at least that's the official date that most historians agree. It broke out, the 100 Years' War between England and France. And I'll try and mention that a little bit in a moment. And then finally, so that was today's contribution, isn't it? Friday the 24th. She wasn't a Friday then, but the 24th. And then finally, just finishing the week off, tomorrow, 25th of May. 25th of May, 1659, Richard Cromwell, son of Oliver Cromwell, resigns as Lord Protector of England. And I think a lot of people don't even realise that when Oliver Cromwell died, his son became the Lord Protector after him, which is quite an interesting thing for the great fight for parliamentary democracy. And the first thing that Lord Protector does is pass on his Lord Protectorship to the next generation of his own family. But there you go. Didn't last long. He lasted about 8 months. And Richard Cromwell really wasn't that keen on the job, wasn't up to the job, or possibly up for the job either. And, resigned 25th of May, 1659. And then Britain was in this real limbo as to who the hell controlled it. And within a year, in fact, actually, 25th of May, 1660, 12 months after Richard Cromwell had resigned as Lord Protector, Charles II arrives back in England. He lands at Dover on the 25th of May, 1660. And that's the beginning. He has a sort of, he marches on London. It's a procession to London. It's not a military march. Crowds are coming out to greet him. Thank goodness we've got the royal family back. And Charles II, this is the period that's called the Restoration in British history. And last but not least, just to come up to the 20th century, 25th of May, 1940, the Battle of Boulogne ends during the Second World War. Obviously, by the date in 1940, right at the very outset of the Second World War, during the German blitzkrieg through France and the Low Countries. And a garrison, French and British forces held out at the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer on the northwest coast of France, just down from Calais, which in itself is just down from Dunkirk. So the Allies were being pushed back. They were cut off at Boulogne, and the British, or at least the Guards regiments, were there, the Irish and Welsh Guards, and they were evacuated. And there was a breakdown in communications. The French, who were holding the area above the town, didn't get the order to evacuate. They claimed they didn't get the order because communications actually physically had broken down. And a large part of the British, including the Guards Brigade, were evacuated by the Royal Navy. And some British units and a large quantity of French soldiers were left at Boulogne and surrendered. 5,000 of them, 4,000 were evacuated, but 5,000 French and British, principally French troops, surrendered to the Germans on the 25th of May, 1940. So there we go. So what do people think of that lot? Is that a bit of a mad week in British history? I'll go into our deep dive a moment in a minute. So Falklands campaign feels like yesterday. Yep. Just looking down here. Leslie, you're a bit of a Wars of the Roses fan. And of course, interestingly, Wars of the Roses provided the inspiration for George Martin's books on the Game of Thrones, or that became the Game of Thrones TV series. So, and when you study that history and then watch Game of Thrones, you think, oh, actually, I can see where there aren't parallels in history, but you can see where a lot of his ideas came from. Fascinating stuff. My kin, Jeremy Scott says, my kin were from County Clare and part of the United Irish. Yeah, I think the main areas of resistance rising, Jeremy, were in Ulster in the north and also in County Wexford. But obviously there are United Irishmen everywhere else, and some were rising. It's just that those are the two centres of real resistance, or from my understanding at any rate. Back to the Falklands. Anyone know how long the 100 Years' War lasted, says John. Yes, John, it lasted actually about 120 years, on and off. Okay, so it finally, and I will touch on that in a moment, because we've had two dates from the 100 Years' War, crucial dates in the 100 Years' War. in this week, happened in history this week. So I will just touch on 100 Years' War briefly in a moment. All right. He's just looked it up. QAL Library, 116 years. Yeah, okay. 1337, 1453. So, yeah, I said 120, didn't I? A video on battles less covered in the War of the Roses would be interesting, like Wakefield, Hexham, Second St Albans. Towton, Bosworth Field, Tewkesbury and Barnet are covered in a lot of YouTube videos. In fact, strangely enough, Carl, I've done them on all of those. One that would be really good is Battle of Mortimer's Cross as well, down in as I say, on the Hereford Shropshire border. Okay, crazy week in British history, and Doctor Probably Not. Welcome to being a Waterloo member of my membership channel here on YouTube. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining. Right, so I thought we'd go back and dive into a few more, but I just wanted to first off actually just ask you a couple of questions. I'll share with you what's coming up in the history chap over the next few weeks, but also I could take a really good steer from you. So obviously we've done Exercise Tiger, and that's sort of a bit of a nod to D-Day coming up, 80th anniversary of D-Day on the 6th of June. 6th of June, a couple of weeks' time. Obviously, 6th of June 1944 was when the D-Day landings took place in Normandy. And I will be doing one about Pegasus Bridge, and I've got a couple more lined up. I've just got to get a bit of a fair wind behind me to make sure I can get them done in time. Might be one also delivered the week afterwards, but there's certainly one as well around actually how close did D-Day come to failing? Or how, it's that famous turns, isn't it? Because history, we were talking about this week on my live call when we're talking about, funny enough, about Nectansmere or Dunnectan, the story of the Picts fighting the Northumbrians. And now we look back at history and we think, there was always going to be in England. It's in the name, isn't it? And there's obviously Scotland's been there since time immemorial. And of course, that's just not the case. England, there was never a guarantee it was ever going to be in England. At different junctures, the old Romano-British people could have fought back, did try and fight back. And there was no guarantee, of course, that when the Vikings rocked up, that there was ever going to be a united England. And likewise, up in Scotland, they were vying. The Picts were just one of the groups in Scotland at this time, because the Scots from Ireland were there with the kingdom of Dalriada. Then we had Strathclyde as another kingdom. So sometimes we always assume, and rather like D-Day, it's going to happen. It was massive. It was going to win. But actually, how close could it have come to losing? So anyway, hopefully I'll take some time on that. Definitely want to cover Pegasus Bridge, because I've had a few requests from different viewers about Pegasus Bridge, and in particular a couple of gliders who didn't land at Pegasus Bridge as well. Then I've got to go back and do a little bit of Victorian. Okay, so we've got the Fashoda incident. That's well in the pipeline now. Done all, and that script's almost written for that. So the Fashoda incident in Sudan, where the British and French had a face-off in 1898. And, well, it was probably the last time the British and French came close to having a war against each other. But anyway, I'm also going to do one about the general who nearly prevented the Boer War. Thought that would be one. From the Zulu Wars, we've got the Battle of Gingin-Lovo coming up. And I thought from the First World War, we would touch the First World War, the Battle of Jutland. So I've got a few things there coming up. I don't know if any of those tickle your fancy at all. And big question, though, what else should I be covering? Where would you like me to go with some of the history chap stories? I mean, do you want more 19th century, more of the empire stuff? Do you want more First World War or Second World War? Or indeed, would you like me to tell battles from further back in British history, Sedgemoor, the English Civil Wars, the Wars of the Roses, and going back further, Hastings, Stamford Bridge, those sort of things? Of course, and in there, we've also got things like the American War of Independence and Napoleonic Wars. Haven't done any of that stuff. And then also, I guess, do you just want me to stick with stories that sort of have a military bent to them? I mean, I think you get the idea that I'm probably not I'm not a military nerd like some people are on YouTube. But I know, like Dick Turpin was, it's definitely not military. Lots of people like that. I've had nearly 80,000 views on that video. So, Dick Turpin. I mean, next week in British history, we've got the Peasants' Revolt. I mean, are those sort of things maybe you'd like me to go to, or do you want me to stick with where I am? And in particular, I guess the real big, the area I guess I sort of own is 19th century military, British military. But of course, I'm intrigued. What would people like me to eat? Not necessarily specific titles, but are there areas that you would really like me to either branch out into, or indeed areas you really want me to stick in and stay there? Please put some comments in now. And I promise, I don't care what you put in the comments, but when you've had a moment to put something in the comments, let's dive into a few of these in a few events that happened in British history this week in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's have Anglo-Burmese War, 1842. Maybe the Battle of Lone Pine and the aftermath. Ginginlovo and the Siege of Oshawa will be a winner. Thank you. It all sounds good, Chris. Yeah, that's the problem, Mike. Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a sponge, and I think I can probably tell stories about most things in British history. Funny enough, someone's actually asked me, in fact, several requests, in fact, to do the Battle of Adwa in Ethiopia. Nothing to do with the British per se. This is where the Ethiopians, or the Abyssinians, as they were called at the time, defeated the Italian invasion in 1896. Massive victory, and it made the Battle of Isandlwana, where the British lost to the Zulus, that was like kindergarten stuff compared to what happened at Adwa. So I mean, I've never really branched out and done anything from other countries, mainly because there's so much British stuff that, I've just gone through what's happened in British history this week. There are so many great stories there, but that might be one. Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for your generous donation there as well. Thank you very much. $10. Thank you. But yeah, and other people have talked about the Little Bighorn as well, and and maybe a comparison between Isandlwana and the Little Bighorn, or at least between Custer and Chelmsford. Were they peas in a pod as military commanders? Which would be a really cool one to do. I think my starter for 10 was no, they're not peas in a pod. But and Chelmsford, in one respect, has been slighted by history, and slighted in the film Zulu Dawn as well, as this rather pompous Victorian general, toff Lord Chelmsford. Actually, I think there was quite a lot of ego going on with George Custer, probably a lot more ego than actually was going on with Lord Chelmsford. But anyway, so what else have we got here? The Anglo-Dutch War. That's a good one. That'd be a good one. Not least, of course, the raid on the Medway, where the Dutch basically did a Pearl Harbor on the Royal Navy, didn't they? They sailed up the River Medway. It wasn't a surprise attack. They took several days about it, but they sailed up the River Medway and basically blasted the Royal Navy that was based in the River Medway. And then I seem to remember they made off with the flagship of the Royal Navy flagship, which was named after the King. It was the King Charles during Charles II's time, and it was the King Charles. And interestingly, obviously a massive blow to the Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy had to be rebuilt after that. Enter one Samuel Pepys. That was one of his roles, was helping to rebuild the Navy after that. Jutland's worth an episode on its own. Sandy it is. And I have to say, I was hoping to do Jutland in the next couple of weeks. Jutland has got so many moving parts in the battle. I need to get it right. Okay, I could do a noddy version of Jutland. I think most of you would appreciate something slightly more than that. So just bear with me on that one, Sandy. It is coming, and I know Ian, one of my patrons, is desperate for me to do Jutland. But so yeah, that will be on its way. How about something about William Wallace? Freedom. Yeah, I mean the whole English-Scottish battles. We've got Bannockburn is next week. Next week? No, it's coming up. Is it next week? It might be the week after in British history. And funny enough, I've actually got it on my hit list to do. That will get the cat. That will get the hairs running, won't it? Some Englishman talking about the Battle of Bannockburn. History of the Royal Marines. What about Samuel Pepys? Yeah, Battle of Taranto, the British Pearl Harbor. Yeah, that very much was the British dishing it out that time. Yeah. Have I done the Charge of the Light Brigade? Yes, I have. There is a video in there. I think it's called the Charge. Joking apart, I think it's called the Charge of the Light Brigade. Yeah, I'm good with my titles, aren't I? A couple of them, some of them I did about 2 years ago, and already they're looking dated. And I've moved on so much in how I do the videos and how I do the recordings. And yeah, I mean, my one on Gordon of Khartoum really feels I need to go back to at some stage. And the Battle of Omdurman. I look back now and look at some of the maps and think, oh my God, did I really put that out on YouTube? Amazingly, it's had over 1 million views. So obviously, people aren't that upset about the maps. But yeah, Mike, you're going for something about William Wallace. Yeah, and of course, William Wallace is one of those ones, interesting character in his own right, but then you can also go into the, is he the Braveheart? How close was the Braveheart film or Mel Gibson to William Wallace? How important was William Wallace? Interesting perspective, because that's one of those ones you can probably either make him an absolute hero or dish him. Was he a bit player? Well, a little bit more than a bit player, but did he inspire Scots the way that Scots almost nowadays are inspired by him? Did he actually have that effect at the time? Don't know. Jeremy, Bannister Tarleton. Yeah, I've got him on my list, so bear with me on that one. And don't forget, I'm moving towards. We are everyone moving towards American independence, since the celebrations of American independence, 1776, moving through to 2026. So I will be coming to the wars of the American colonists, but maybe also something around the 7 Years' Wars as well, and indeed, how about Last of the Mohicans, which is obviously based on real events and a real massacre by Native Americans on the British who had surrendered at a particular fort up in upstate New York, I think it was. So someone else says, I love American Revolutionary history. We've got Bannockburn. You've just looked it up. 24th of June. That will be why I've got it potentially here for the 20th of June. So although that's buying at the minute, I've put here Bannockburn or Jutland. Choices, hey? And you can only have one. All right. Hey guys, let's move into a little bit more of what happened in British history this week and go into a bit more detail. But thank you ever so much, everyone, for some of your thoughts. Okay. Loving this history chap stuff. Really am. And just I'm like a kid in a sweet shop. The problem is choosing which sweets to eat. And anyway, right. So let's just go for a couple here. I'm going to go for. Let me just pick this one. Okay, right. We've done the dates, chronological dates. So now I'm just going to dip in and out. So let me go back. Yeah, let's go for this one, and then we'll do a little bit of medieval. Okay. So 20th of May, 1845, the last duel was fought in Britain. 1845. We're talking. This is Queen Victoria was already on the throne by now. Okay, she was married to Prince Albert. They had kids, and people were still fighting duels in Britain. This last duel actually took place down, as I say, on a beach near Gosport, which is in Hampshire, near Portsmouth. For those of you who are trying to look at a British map or map of England, trying to work out where the hell Gosport is, it was actually fought between two military officers, Lieutenant Henry Hawkey, who was from the Royal Marines, and James Seaton from the cavalry officer. Seaton had made advances on Hawkey's wife. Hawkey wasn't very impressed, and so he challenged Seaton to a duel. They met on the afternoon or the late early evening, 5 p.m, on a beach near Gosport, as I say, just outside Portsmouth. They fired 2 rounds of shots against each other, and in that process, the Royal Marine, Lieutenant Henry Hawkey, was the better shot. He actually shot and injured James Seaton, the cavalry officer. Seaton was wounded. He was taken off the field from the duel, And he then died of an infection. A surgeon tried to treat the wound, and he died of an infection. So not only was this the last duel, James Seaton actually can qualify as the last man to be killed in a duel. Well, because of a duel, because he wasn't killed there and then. He died afterwards. And Hawkeye was put on trial, strangely enough, for murder. And he was acquitted. And this is the brilliant one. And British justice, it doesn't get better than this. Hawkeye was acquitted because it was argued successfully by his barrister that he hadn't killed Seaton. The surgeon had killed Seaton by basically his operation, which then got infected. And it was the infection that killed Seaton. Remember that one, folks. Whenever you decide to shoot someone, as long as you don't kill them there and then on the spot and they die at the National Health Service or in a local hospital, you're off the hook. You can quote this bit of great law case and say, it wasn't me, it was the ambulance didn't get fast enough to the hospital. Let's see how that one stands up in a modern day court. But that's great, isn't it? So last duel in Britain, 1845, and the man who killed the other man managed to get off. Don't know what happened to Hawkeye later on in his career, but yeah, don't know. He disappears from records, so he obviously didn't become a general or anything like that. Mentioned two dates from medieval history this week that were interconnected, which is the 100 Years' War. And the 100 Years' War broke out on the 24th of May, 1337. 100 Years' War between England and France. And how the hell, why the hell did it ever start in the first place? Well, oh lordy, lordy. I've only got 20 odd minutes here, so let me try and keep it really, really short. Ever since William the Conqueror's time, or before William the Conqueror's time, no, let me pause. Okay. From William the Conqueror's time, William had been William of Normandy prior to conquering England after 1066. Normandy was a vassal state of the King of France. In other words, the Norman dukes, including Duke William, held it on behalf of the King of France. They paid him homage, which is okay. If you're a Duke of Normandy, a Duke of Brittany, wherever, you pay a bit of homage and you can run your own lands okay. Duke William now created this strange place. After 1066, he created this slightly strange setup where he had to pay homage to the King of France for his lands in Normandy, but he was King of England in his own right. Can you imagine how egos start to move here? Fast forward to Henry II. Henry II, first of the House of Plantagenet, the Angevin Empire, as it was called very often. Henry II inherited the English throne. He already had lands. He was Henry of Anjou. He held lands in France, again, paying homage to the King of France. He had Anjou. He then inherited Normandy, or parts of Normandy, and he also inherited the Kingdom of England. He'd also married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Mentioned that last week. It happened last week in British history. And she brought with her a whole parcel of lands down in the southwest of France, Aquitaine, around Bordeaux. And basically, Henry II ruled an empire, the first ever sort of English empire, I guess, from Hadrian's Wall, border with Scotland, all the way down through England, all the way down the western side of France to the Pyrenees. I mean, that's a heck of an empire. And all those lands in France, he in theory held on behalf of the King of France, paid homage to the extent that the King of France, at times around that stage, actually had less political control over lands, his own French lands, than the Kings of England did. So you can see where there was a whole lot of the argy-bargy happened. Okay, so we had this long dispute, wars back and forwards. The English were losing lands, then they'd gain lands, and they'd lose lands. But whatever lands they had in France, they always paid homage. Didn't like paying homage because, of course, they were kings in their own right. So they didn't really want to pay homage to another king. You don't go kneel down in front of the King of France when you're the King of England. So they used to find all sorts of wheezes to get out, like they'd send their son to do it. So the Prince of Wales, or the one Prince of Wales, the heir to the English throne would do it rather than the king, that sort of thing. Slowly, the English lost most of their lands in France. Were really left only with the stuff in around the southwest of France, around Gascony, including the Duchy of oh lordy, the Duchy of Guyenne, down near Bordeaux. In 1328, 1328, beg your pardon, King Charles IV of France died, and he had no children. First time in a long time in the French succession. The succession was up in the air. No children. The closest relative, okay, was the son of his sister. That just happened to be Edward III of England. Couple of things. First and foremost, he was English, and the French weren't really happy about having an Englishman as their king. Straightforward xenophobia, and the English are just like that with the French, aren't they? Just like that with the Scots, of course, when James VI of Scotland was potentially going to become King of England, as he did do, James I. A lot of English really not happy about having a Scottish king. Looked for a lot of other options in case rather than a Scot. So xenophobia, alive and well. The other thing was the French traditionally had always passed the throne went through the male line. And Edward was claiming it through his mother, the King of France's sister. And so that immediately opened up other contenders to say, we've actually got all male blood, brothers, brothers of a grandfather and all this sort of thing. So we actually have the male claim to the king of the throne of France. And a few years later, the French actually went with a French candidate. And a few years later, that candidate confiscated what remained of Edward III's lands, because Edward III wouldn't pay homage. He confiscated those lands down in Gascony, in the southwest of France, and that fundamentally is how the 100 Years' War started. Started because of the confiscation, but it was fundamentally Edward believed he had been done out of his rightful claim to the French throne. And if you go back into royal coats of arms of England, you will see the fleur-de-lis on the English coats of arms. The fleur-de-lis, the national emblem of France, that was the English kings, basically, except from then onwards, claiming right to the French throne. And that right to the French throne was never given up until after the French Revolution. They didn't push it very hard. People like George III weren't after the French throne, but they would say, actually, we should be the kings of France. Okay. So if ever you wonder what the hell these fleur-de-lis are doing on people like Queen Elizabeth I's coat of arms, things like that, that's where the fleur-de-lis, that's where it fits in. Kicked off the 100 Years' War. 100 Years' War, toed and froed, some significant English victories, including in 1415, Henry V defeating the French at the Battle of Agincourt, which took us 5 years later to the Treaty of Troyes. This was a treaty where, as I said earlier, Henry V agreed with the King of France, who just happened to be Charles VI at the time, that a deranged king, so not entirely in charge of all his faculties. And Henry V said, I will marry your daughter, and when you die, either I have the throne or my children will have the throne. And the king agreed in this treaty that would happen. The English and French thrones would be united after all, which, don't forget, was where Edward III had kicked off this whole 100 Years' War thing in the first place. Okay, nearly 100 years prior to Agincourt. So that was sort of all well and good, although the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne, the son of the King of France, wasn't best happy with that treaty. He basically refused to ratify the treaty, refused to recognize the treaty, and he was already setting himself up to fight Henry V for the throne when it became vacant. It became vacant just 2 years later, in 1422, when the old deranged king died. Weeks before that, Henry V of England had also died. And he left an infant son, who became Henry VI. Henry VI, who I mentioned just now in the Wars of the Roses. He was about 1 year old at the time. And strangely enough, whilst he was crowned in Paris, he was never he could never hold on to his lands. There's no way a boy king. The Dauphin saw his opportunity. Dauphin rose in rebellion, joined by enter one Joan of Arc. That's how she fits into the story. Within 7 years of Henry V dying and his little son taking over, within 7 years they've captured Orleans. That's how Joan of Arc gets her name, the Maid of Orleans. And they pushed the English back and back and back, and Henry VI basically lost all the lands that both his father Henry V had won, but and people before that as well. So that's how the long and short of that came into it. And finally, as I can't remember who on earth picked it up. Was it Charlie Manson? Was it Leslie? I can't remember. Someone saw it. 1453, the Battle of Castillon, where basically it was the last. It wasn't a big battle, but it was the last battle of the 100 Years' War, and the English were reduced to the port of Calais. That was from that vast empire that Henry II had once, running all the way from Hadrian's Wall down to the Pyrenees, all through that western side of France, more lands than the King of France themselves held. The English now held Calais, and they would hold it for best part of 100 years, lost it eventually under Queen Mary Tudor. So there we go. And so Henry VI, just to pause on that one, Henry VI, Henry V's son, the little boy, is the only person to have ever been king of both England and France, proclaimed as such and crowned as such. Didn't do him much good, didn't keep most of his lands in France, and he managed to lose his throne in England during the Wars of the Roses. So yeah, well done, young Henry VI. But there you go. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit from British history. Just watching the time. Let me take this one for you, okay? Captain Kidd. Bit of pirates. Do we all like piracy? I think we do. Piracy in itself is a massive topic. I mean, there were pirates around. Julius Caesar fought pirates, didn't he? We had the Barbary pirates, which has been one of our more popular videos, actually, all about the North African pirates who were at it throughout the Mediterranean, including actually capturing fishing boats off the coast of England during the reign of Charles I and Oliver Cromwell, indeed. And in fact, they landed in Cornwall near Malsall and raided a village, took all the people off, raided a village over in Ireland as well, in Baltimore, in Republic of Ireland. Even went as far as Iceland. They actually landed in Iceland and took captured people there as well. Barbary pirates. Look it up if you haven't watched that video before. Fascinating. I do say in the video, that's not trying to somehow balance it and say, somehow because a few English people were enslaved. Well, it wasn't a few, there's several thousands actually over 100 years. But that doesn't exactly equate to West Atlantic transportation across the Atlantic for black people from Africa. But it is probably recognizing that slavery has been around for a hell of a long time and has affected a lot of people. And quite frankly, whether you were enslaved by the Vikings or the Barbary pirates or by British or Portuguese people taking you over to the West Indies or to Brazil or to the American colonies, I think it was slavery is slavery and probably brings ruin and hardship to so many people, doesn't it? Anyway, Captain Kidd was also a pirate. Now, the Barbary pirates relied on slavery. Most of our pirates that we tend to think of from European perspectives tend to be into, gold and raiding the Spanish Main and things like that and drinking lots of rum. And there probably was a golden age of that Caribbean or that European piracy, which was probably from about 1650 to 1750, something like somewhere around that sort of time, maybe slightly earlier. But through the middle of the 17th through to the middle of the 18th centuries. And one of those characters, probably one of the most famous, is Captain Kidd. Captain Kidd, as much as anything, is because of his legacy. But he was, as I say, hanged in London for piracy on the 23rd of May, 1701. So slap bang in that middle of that golden piracy age. Born in Scotland, born at Greenock in 1645. By 1689, he was actually on a ship, a legitimate privateer on behalf of the English. So don't want to go into it too much, but at different stages, The English and other European nations, including the French in particular, used to have pirates who were effectively employed by the state, weren't actually paid by the state, but they were given a free rein. And the free rein went like this: you're a pirate. We don't want you to obviously hit any of our own ships, because obviously anything's fair game as a pirate. If you're an English pirate and an English merchant ship comes along laden with gold, what do you say? Do you say patriotic duty to let it get to England, or do you just raid it? Don't forget, pirates, rather like highwaymen, were criminals. So what governments did was basically say, don't touch our ships, but you've got absolutely free rein to take out ships from either an enemy or a country that we're a bit at loggerheads with. So the only way I could probably describe it in the modern age is maybe if you're operating in the Red Sea, Dead Sea area, Red Sea, Gulf area, Indian Ocean, as a pirate, don't attack British or American ships. But if you see an Iranian one, they're fair game. That's sort of how it worked. These were called privateers. Privateers obviously had a major problem, which was that one minute they'd be effectively being endorsed by a government, and then when you have a peace treaty and you go and raid those ships, your government are now after you for breaking the peace treaty. Anyway, he was a legitimate privateer hunting down basically Spanish and French ships off the north coast of North America and in the Caribbean. By 1690, he was recorded as owning ships, being a ship owner in New York. So he wasn't skulking away. He was seen as not quite a pillar of the establishment, but something very similar. And in 1695, he was given a royal warrant. He travelled to London and he was given his own royal warrant to basically be a privateer in the Indian Ocean, taking out ships from Britain's or England's enemies in the Indian Ocean. And off he sailed. He sailed down from London, sailed to Plymouth. Then he moved on to New York, recruited a crew in New York. And then they set sail, sailed down around the tip of Africa, around Cape Town, and ended up on the Comoro Islands, or off the Comoro Islands, which is sort of up the east coast of Africa, in between the east coast of Africa and Madagascar. And he proceeded to go hunting for enemy ships, principally Dutch and French ships at the time. Well, strangely enough, he couldn't find any. So he just went back. Remember I said earlier, you don't attack your own? Well, he decided that, we're stuck here in the... Obviously, don't forget, your crew were told they were going to get lots of goodies. And as a captain, if you can't deliver those, you're in jeopardy. Your life would probably be in jeopardy, because actually all they'd say is, we're going to mutiny, probably kill you, stick you in a boat at the very best, and we will go off under a new leader who said, hey, let's go and raid Mecca or something outrageous. But if that's where you think the loot is, that's where you'll go. So he decided to go pirating himself, and eventually sailed back to New York to find out that actually he was now a wanted man for his piracy. Pleaded with the governor of New York, British governor of New York at the time, to that he was innocent, that he hadn't attacked anything, he hadn't done anything untoward. Governor of New York had absolutely none of it and sent him in chains to London to stand trial for piracy. And there in early May 1701, he was found guilty. He was found guilty of a murder. And ironically, this was murdering one of his own crew who had tried to mutiny against him for the very reasons that he wouldn't attack a ship from a particular nation. I think it was a Dutch ship he wouldn't attack. And this person had said, I'm going to raise the crew and we're going to dump you and we're going to attack that ship we can see on the horizon. And strange enough, a kid shot him. And strange enough, he was done for his murder. He was also done for he was also found guilty of 5 acts of piracy. And he was hanged at Execution Dock, which is on the edge of the River Thames, down sort of Canary Wharf area now, in London in 1701. So 23rd of May 1701, during the golden age of piracy, Captain Kidd is executed, and his body was then hung in a gibbet, hanging on the river, for all seafarers to be reminded that should they go and become pirates, that was the end they were going to get. Kidd became famous as much after his time as during his time. He was actually a reasonably low-key pirate, but his legacy was that he had supposedly captured lots of gold and treasures while he was in the Indian Ocean. and he'd buried it somewhere. And to this day, people are searching for Captain Kidd's treasure, and it's the treasure that's really made Captain Kidd as famous as he is, because people like Blackbeard were much more famous in their own time, in their own days, than Captain Kidd was. So there you go. Let me just go off here. Charlie Manson's talking about Iceland. Yeah, we've got the Barbary pirates on the roll. Won't go down too many of those. First Barbary wars were fought by the US Navy in 1801. Yes, and that's where the Marines, in their anthem, from the shores of Tripoli, that's where that line comes from. It's from the Barbary Wars in 1801. Hey, there you go. But you didn't think I was going to have a bit of American history for you there. But check it out, because I mentioned that. I actually give the Americans a fair nod in my video about the Barbary pirates. So have a look at it if you haven't seen before. We've got Jim Ladd. I'm sure we should have Pieces of 8 or something in here. Did anyone get as far as China from Europe and carry out piracy? Not sure, but of course the South China Sea was rife with pirates. The East India Company actually had an anti-pirate. These were like Chinese, Borneo, Philippines pirates operating out of all those areas. The East India Company had an anti-pirate squadron in that part of the world. So yeah. Let's have a look here. Oak Island is what Leslie. Yeah, that's right. That's where Captain Kidd's treasure supposedly is buried. And you can't go through Discovery Channel or the History Channel without finding at least one more Oak Island documentary, digging for gold, supposedly, and not finding any. Terry Murphy, John Paul Jones also got into trouble for killing a man when he mutinied. Yeah, it was. I mean, I guess tough times in the navies, and that thing about crews wanting to mutiny. If you were as good as what you gave your crew, very much how Viking boats operated as well. They followed the captain, and if you didn't give them the goodies, they'd they'd get rid of you or they'd join another ship. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. Right, folks. John Avery operated around Madagascar. Again, there was actually a pirate base at the north end of Madagascar. I think it was called a pirate republic in inverted commas. Yeah, maybe you should do some more about pirates. Do you think I should do pirates at some stage? Be a bit different from Zulu Wars, wouldn't it? And Exercise Tiger at Slapton Sands, a bit of Jim Ladd. Oh yeah, QA Library's gone for it. Yes, please. Any chance about a chat about the Vikings, Chris? Yeah, would love to do one. Let me make a note of that one for the future. Okay, who said that? That's Mike. Okay, yeah, Mike. Vikings, again, amazing history. Because, again, we tend to think about it from a British perspective. English perspective is all about Alfred the Great. Yeah, and if you're a Bernard Cornwall fan, and Uhtred and the Vikings there. But don't forget, they were harrying Scotland. They set up a Viking settlement in Ireland where they were trading Irish slaves. Another one, slavery again. And that Irish settlement for the slave trading principally was Dublin. So it was a Viking settlement, not a traditional Gaelic Irish settlement, but came into its own as a Viking settlement. The Vikings obviously went down into the Mediterranean. They were trading there. They went across the Baltic. They were trading through what's now Russia, and down the rivers, the mighty rivers, to the Don and things like that, down to the Black Sea. Were trading with Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire at the time. Phenomenal. So, yeah, would like to do some Vikings without getting lost in it, because I reckon you can almost have your own channel all about Vikings, actually, and Viking history and Viking folklore, things like Ragnar Lothbrok and things like that. You got me going now. Woo! So there you go. One last thing I want to very quickly trace on. We've got a minute, so let me just quickly touch on this one. The Quinton's Hill railway disaster, 22nd of May, 1915. During the First World War, a train left Edinburgh carrying the 7th Battalion of the Royal Scots Regiment. They were a territorial army battalion, and they were being taken down to Liverpool to board a ship to go to Gallipoli. They were coming south, coming towards Gretna Green, so just north of the English-Scottish border, coming south. And coming the other way was a goods train, and a slow train coming north. Behind it was coming an express train coming from the south, from England as well. So it was told it needed to get out of the way of the express train. There was actually a spur that it could have been pushed onto, the slow train, but unfortunately there was a train already on the spur. So what the signal box did was put it onto the line coming south for the time being, and while the express train thundered past. What the signalman in the signal box didn't do was tell the train coming from Edinburgh there was now a train coming straight towards them on their line, that slow goods train. And the train carrying the Scots, for the men from the 7th Battalion of the Royal Scots Regiment, ploughed straight in to the goods train that was on their line. It fell over, so it collapsed, turned over in the collision, and now the carriages were on the northbound line. The northbound line that had now been cleared by that slow train for the express train coming up from England. And the express train ploughed in to all those carriages with the men that were all on their sides, with all those soldiers probably lying dazed, broken limbs, God knows what else, ploughed into that. The force of the crash started some fires, and unfortunately, under each of the carriages that had been carrying the soldiers was a gas canister for heating the carriages, and basically the most almighty inferno broke out on the railway lines at Quintin's Hill. 216 troops, plus the driver and the fireman from their train, plus 10 people from the express train, were killed in this inferno. In fact, the fire burnt so hard, so it was so hot, that out of those 228 people who died, they could only identify 83 of the bodies. That's phenomenal, isn't it? The Royal Scots, the men who died, as I say, 216 troops, First World War, on their way to Gallipoli, and 216 of them were killed just before the English-Scottish border. Hadn't even got anywhere near Gallipoli and the disasters that were to befall Allied troops at Gallipoli. The 216 troops were taken back. They were buried. As I say, most of them couldn't actually be identified, but they were buried at Rosebank Cemetery in Scotland, in Edinburgh, where there is a really impressive monument. Anyone who ever goes to Edinburgh, I would take some time just to go and have a look at it. But it stands to this day, 228 people, stands to this day, worst ever rail disaster in British history. There you go. And on that cheerful note, I'm going to bid you adieu, because I've got things like Euros to get and packing and all those sort of useful things, all the things that I will get into trouble with when I announce tomorrow morning that I haven't done any of them because I was talking to all of you good folk. So have a great, I'm just having a quick look here. What else have we got there? The Great Emu Wars. Great Emu Wars, thank you. We've mentioned the Vikings. Theodore Roosevelt sent Marines after the Barbary pirates. Did he? I didn't realize that. Didn't realize it was late as that. I knew we'd had stuff in the 19th century. I thought actually by the time Theodore Roosevelt came along, that area of North Africa was controlled by the French. And I thought they'd sort of basically wiped out that Barbary trade. Gas lights were banned after that Quintin's Hill Railway disaster. Didn't know that, but makes sense, doesn't it? At least we learned from it. Expat. Wow, that's quite cool. John Paul Jones married an ancestor of mine. Leslie's asking, who is Dennis Waterman? I don't quite know where that one came in there. Thank you, Jen. Obviously not too far up from Quintin's Hill, not too far up from where you live in the world. Thank you for the stream. My pleasure. Absolutely. Kat, have a great day. Have a great weekend yourself. Guys, just to confirm, I won't be here next week. I'll be sunning myself, sampling the local wine. But there will be a video out next week. And in the meantime, have a look at the Barbary Pirates. Check that one out. Check out Exercise Tiger as well if you haven't seen that. But in the meantime, Have a great weekend, great next week as well. See you in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Thank you very much for all your support as ever. Thank you.